Let's start with Scott Woodward. LSU's athletics director today met with the media via teleconference. And this was probably easier because everybody was going to want to talk to Scott Woodward and has wanted to talk to Scott Woodward all throughout all of this. And so he said, let's just do it all, assembled in one place at one time and knocked it out. And maybe the most interesting thing that Scott Woodward said is that, and this is indicative of what's happening, it's that the focus right now is no longer on the spring sports, which tells you any remote possibility of them returning is likely null.
That's going to be the focus going forward is, what we do for our fall sports, because obviously the championships for our spring sports are concluded. So it is going to be how do we get up and prepare for our fall sports, and that is in flux and that is being discussed both at the NCAA and the SEC level.
So it's not about spring, it's about let's get ready for fall, and clearly that means LSU football, which we'll get into here in a second. Scott Woodward was asked if spring football practice would resume eventually.
Yeah, that's way too speculative. My worry, personally, and my concern is that we get ready for the fall season, and we'll deal with how we did spring or what we did with spring. That's kind of in our rearview mirror. But we'll worry about how we prepare for the fall sports at the appropriate time, whether that's allowing more practices or doing things differently by sport. But that's to be determined.
One of the questions people have about spring practice is that put you at a competitive disadvantage. Well, it is important to note that if spring practice does not return, that every program has that same competitive disadvantage. Now, some teams were actually finished with spring football. Oddly enough, because LSU season went later, they started about when they normally do, but some had already finished. Alabama had yet to begin. LSU got 3 practices in. So that's going to vary. But by and large, all of college football is going to deal with that same competitive disadvantage of not having had spring football. So in many respects, it's still a level playing field. It's disappointing, but if it doesn't return, then I don't know that anyone has a huge advantage over the other. Now, Scott Woodward was also asked about the decision to cancel the College World Series and the Women's College World Series and if he felt that were premature.
What you'll know and what you'll see is that everyone's doing their best and doing an incredible job of in these difficult times of making decisions at the time of that decision. And I can assure you right now that, from my standpoint and from the league standpoint, that we're always going to err on the side of overreaction instead of underreaction because we're dealing with life and death. And so the speculator to look what was decided then or there or what took place on Wednesday versus Tuesday or Monday is a game of folly in my observation.
So Woodward, a game of folly, speculative, all you heard there. Certainly what happened last week and into this weekend because there was such a dramatic reaction which started with the NBA suspending its season. And once that happened, every domino fell. But it is important to note that the NBA suspended its season. It did not cancel. It suspended. The NCAA's decision to cancel and then, the spring sports, all of that which followed, I think caused a general reaction from people that was intense, and not everybody handled that news the same. But the SEC at least has kept the door open to this point of college baseball returning and possibly having the SEC baseball tournament. Of course, the NCAA championships won't happen, but with the SEC moving that March 30th date to April 15th and nothing else, it left open the possibility of returning at some point, if it were 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and then resuming play at that point, and then maybe having a postponed or delayed SEC baseball tournament. Remember, baseball and softball extend into the summer beyond the spring semester. So there is some reason to think, well, what's another week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks if it that's what it meant to play a more full schedule. But Scott Woodward today essentially nipped that in the bud, that any thoughts that we all had of the SEC baseball tournament happening this year, it's just not going to happen.
As of Friday, the SEC office told me that they hadn't actually canceled the SEC baseball tournament. Is that still the case?
You can rest assured it'll be canceled, Clint, and they'll have an announcement probably tomorrow.
So expect the SEC baseball tournament to be canceled, which means college baseball will not return. Softball will not return. The next time, theoretically, we'd have live sports is whenever the NBA elects to return. Major League Baseball, which has pushed its opening day back at least until May. And then here's hoping that by the time the fall arrives, college football and the NFL, that we're back to some semblance of normalcy and that they can start on time. Which also means, key play 14, please. Woodward was asked about the LSU Spring Game.
Here again, everyone, use common sense. We're not going to be practicing until April 15th and it's scheduled for April 18th. Do you see us playing a game? So the answer here again is no. But you will see formal clarifications coming from the conference.
So again, Scott Woodward via teleconference today. You're expecting cancellations on what had previously been postponed, but with so many more announcements of cancellations and all that's happening, recommendations from the CDC, which we saw earlier this afternoon, another 8 weeks worth of social distancing. It stands to reason that all of this would be delayed into the summer when hopefully the weather warms up and everyone starts feeling better. And it's typically when you see cold and flu season end, when the weather gets warmer, obviously. So here's hoping that is the best case as we move into the summer months.